Sound check February 27th, sound check February 27th, General Issues Committee budget, sound check.
Welcome to the continuation of the General Issues Committee meeting. Please note that this meeting is a continuation of the February 6th, 2023 GIC budget delegation meeting due to a disruption in council chambers. As per the procedural bylaw 21-021 as amended, the February 6th meeting was first recessed and then adjourned before its completion as order was not able to be restored. Today's meeting has been scheduled to hear the remaining delegations. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website, and that presentations and/or reports considered at this meeting are available on the city's website, and that members of the public can contact the clerk's office to acquire documents in an alternate format. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices right on time are to be turned off. Give me a second here. New Apple Watch, still don't know how to use it. So having lots of fun. I'm surprised how many times it ringles and dingles at me. Anyways, back to this. The members of the public can contact the clerk's office to acquire any documents in an alternate format. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during the meeting. I note that quorum is now present. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda? I guess we can't change it because it's just an extenuation, right?
Correct.
Thank you. So item 1 on our agenda would be declarations of interest. Members of the committee, are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Pauls, do you wish to issue a declaration of interest, a non-disqualifying declaration of interest?
Yes, I have non-disqualifying interest. Thank you. My son is a police officer in the City of Hamilton. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder for anyone that has stated that they have a disqualifying interest that they need to vote abstain when the item comes up. Moving on to our delegations. Members of the committee, we will take one motion after the last speaker to receive all of the delegations. Members and delegates are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting. Members may submit another request to speak if they require additional time to ask questions or make comments. Members are reminded that questions of the delegates are for clarification purposes only and not for debate. I would like to remind delegates to please not use the chat function during the meeting, as it means of a communication for members of council and clerks, and for those of you who are participating virtually after you have provided your delegation. If you wish to continue to watch the meeting, you may be able to do so on the city's website or on YouTube. And so we're ready to proceed with our first delegate, which is item 3.1 on our agenda. Evan Ubain, kilometers for public health care, respecting the expansion of public health services and the 2023 Hamilton Police Service budget. And this is an in-person delegation which has been confirmed. And there's Evan. Don't worry, we don't start timing you until you begin speaking.
Check, 1, 2.
We can hear you, and when you begin speaking, we'll begin the clock for you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, City Council members. My name's Evan. I'm with a group called Kilometers for Public Health Care. Today I'm going to talk to you about why we should be defunding the police during a healthcare crisis. Should be kind of obvious, it's not like police can shoot viruses out of the air. But given that there's no mask mandate, somehow even in this chamber where some council members have been hospitalized for COVID, I can see we've got a pretty steep battle ahead of us here. Given the events that happened last time, I figured it should be good to go through a short lesson on bullying. So here's a example of some bullies beating someone up. Should be pretty clear who the bullies are in this case. Now, if we have the hypothetical scenario where some person with an authoritative position is actually funding these bullies, and a group stands up to that person and says, no more funding for these bullies, I would really hope we wouldn't be mislabeling that group as the bullies in this scenario, especially when in our case, all the question was, will you keep funding them? I don't know, that's definitely not bullying. So now that we've covered that, let's go through some stats. So thanks to Stats Canada, we have some Hamilton crime stats here for property crime. The key takeaway from this, there's no trend really over the past few years. We can also look at violent crime. Again, these stats are on a per population basis, and it's been slightly increasing over the years. We can also look at the police budget, thanks to Hamilton Police website. That's also been slightly increasing over the years. So now that we have those three data sets, we can do some interesting analysis. We can look at how the police budget affects property crime, and we can see there's been a slight negative correlation. So as the police budget goes up, it slightly decreases property crime. However, as any stats person would tell you, you have to make sure your result is statistically significant, and in this case it's not. You can see the lower limit of the slope here is below zero, the upper limit is above zero. So in conclusion, Hamilton police budget, no effect on property crime. We can also look at violent crime, and there's actually a positive correlation here. So as we're increasing the police budget, violent crime, statistically significant relationship is also increasing. If that still doesn't convince you, we can look at a case study. Hamilton versus Detroit, similar city size here. You'll notice that their per person police budget is about double what ours is. You'll also notice, surprisingly, for some people in this room maybe, that their property crime and violent crime rates are over double what ours is. So what could be causing it? Is it just that people in Detroit are inherently more violent than people are in Hamilton? As a lot of researchers who have studied this topic over the years have continuously pointed out, even though governments in Canada seem intent on defunding all of our social services, we're still a little bit better off here in Hamilton than Detroit. So it's pretty clear that more policing is not the way to go. I wanted to take a look at Hamilton crime versus public health outcomes just to illustrate the weight of each crisis we're dealing with here. The number of COVID-19 deaths during the pandemic, over 10 times that of homicides in Hamilton, some cases 20 times that. We can also look at long COVID versus total crime, and that's over double. The long COVID, people experiencing long COVID in Hamilton, over double total crime-related events. And that's not even a good comparison, because experiencing long COVID is not comparable to some crime-related events, especially if it's just something like theft. So you would think in that case that we would be funding the police budget far less than our public health. That's not the case. We're funding our police budget over 10 times more than what we're funding our public health system here in Hamilton. So we have a good study here where some researchers estimated a city has to spend between 1.3 million and 2.2 million on hiring new police officers to save one life per year. I'd propose to you housing nearly 100 people would save far more lives, or putting HEPA filters in classrooms, or giving N95 masks to people. So in conclusion, yeah, it should be pretty clear. Defund the police, At least don't give them the increase and fund public housing and public health care. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. That was right on your timer. Are there any delegate or any councillors wishing to ask questions? Councillor Kretsch, please.
Hi, Evan. Thanks very much for your delegation. I had a quick question for you about data that we saw as part of the presentation that was given to us by the Chief of Police. Did you happen to see that presentation or see that data?
I did not see that data. If you could maybe clarify which part they were presenting.
Yeah, no problem. I just wanted to ask first. I didn't want to put you on the spot. Yeah, there was a bit about the Municipal Benchmarking Network of Canada, and it compared, the Municipal Benchmarking Network of Canada compares cities across Canada on various things. Library stuff, police stuff, all kinds of things. Have you ever looked at that data at all, or looked at that in relation to the stuff that you were pulling forward?
Evan?
No, I have not.
Okay, awesome. Those are my questions. I was going to ask you a real specific question about something you haven't seen, which is not fair. So thank you for your presentation.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? Councillor Tom Jackson?
Thank you, Chair Clark, and nice to meet you, Evan. Evan, just a curiosity, on your slide about Hamilton versus Detroit, Hamilton's population, can you just help me out? Those numbers seem much larger than what we traditionally report, around the 560 to the 580,000 range. Just help me out where you may have got that from, please.
Again, from Stats Canada, reports data based on census metropolitan areas.
More of a metropolitan area. Okay. Thank you, Evan. Thanks, Chair Clark.
So that would include Grimsby and Burlington. Okay. Any further questions for Evan? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation today.
All right.
We're moving on to item 3.2 on the agenda, which is Elizabeth Bloomfield respecting the 2023 Hamilton Police Services budget. This is an in-person delegation. Elizabeth, are you in the room? Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Jacqueline Cantar respecting the 2023 municipal budget in person. Jacqueline, are you in the room? We'll now move on to 3.4, Nick de Koning, respecting the 2023 police budget. And I believe Nick is in the room. Come on down.
Thank you, Chair, members of the council. My name is Nick de Koning, longtime resident of Ward 14.
Nick, can you just pull that microphone closer? There you go.
Sure.
Because we don't hear you in the broadcast. So
Okay.
Why don't you start over?
Very good. Thank you, Chair, members of the council. Nick de Koning, a longtime resident of Ward 14. And thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Although I'm retired now, I've had much experience in the budgetary process in private business, in non-government organizations, and most recently 10 years as president of the Catholic Teachers Union here in Hamilton, representing elementary teachers. And I'm amazed at the complexity that you have to deal with here. Not only the thickness, but the way the budgetary process works. And I don't envy you. But ultimately, budgets are about an annual opportunity to set new priorities and evaluate the effectiveness of previous priorities. Your challenge is to set goals in order to achieve a vision, the vision of the best place to raise children and to age successfully. As one paying attention, and I certainly haven't spent the amount of time that you have around this chamber, but my little time looking at the budget, I would say it's very difficult to work your way through it. And for me, as I volunteer in a place that feeds the unhoused and precariously housed, and is an interest of mine. And when I look at the budget, it's a real challenge for you to somehow address that through the budget process, and I understand that, given the levels of government and the complexity, the siloing of your budget process. What we need is, for complex problems, is an integrated solutions. complex problems from multiple budget lines is challenging. Hopefully, many of you, after you go through this for your first time, you can evaluate ways in order to improve the process here, and particularly getting feedback from people so that they don't get the frustration that sometimes you might have heard in maybe previous meetings here. And so I just want to address a few specific areas. In every ward, there are folks that are having a hard time putting dinner on the table, people that have to make choices between medication or food. People that are deciding whether to pay their whole rent this month, and so those are the challenges. And it doesn't, I understand, it doesn't fall uniquely and solely on this chamber here, but certainly you can be part of the solution. In Ward 14, many of the services are not available. We have to go outside the Ward 14 to get services, and that's certainly something I would challenge you to look at, and how do we address that? In the short run, you can address it by following the recommendation and the Just Recovery for All on the transit solution, particularly for the youth that are looking for places to find help. And so I'll challenge you on that. In that Just Recovery for All document, I was amazed to find out that Sasha only has funding for one educator for sexual assaults here in Hamilton. There are over 100,000 students in our systems in this city. And I do not know how one person will be able to achieve the education. I do know this, that there is no way that we are going to arrest our way out of a housing crisis. We're not going to incarcerate our addiction problems away. And we won't have jail sentences that cure mental health diagnosis. And so we're going to have to find, as a community, we are going to have to find better ways of solving problems that are real and obvious in our city. And so my challenge to you is this: budget is about choices. Your choices show your priorities. And I encourage you to make those choices with the most vulnerable neighbors that we have in this city in mind when you do that. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate your presentation. Councillors, are there any questions for Nick? Councillor Alex Wilson.
Thank you. And through the chair, you mentioned your work in education, and you also specifically brought up the consent education that Sasha has that goes to schools, working in the school system, working with students. Can you speak maybe even anecdotally to your experience of when those early interventions are happening, or when folks are able to come in from community-based programming, whether it be Sasha or maybe other programming that you've seen over the years? What is the impact on students on that day, but also lasting and moving forward?
Nick, please.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair. I can't really honestly address that in a meaningful way. I've been out of the class for 10 years, and so I'd be making up an answer, and I don't want to do that.
Councillor?
Thank you. That was my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions of Nick? Seeing none, thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate the work that you've done. Our next delegate is Kara Youngling, respecting the 2023 Hamilton Police Service budget. It's a virtual presentation. We've not received the presentation. She's not logged on? Okay. So I'll put her as not available. Item number 3.6 is Lucia Iannotoni, Hamilton 350, requesting support for Care Fair campaign. This is virtual and it's been confirmed. Lucia, are you there?
Here, can you guys hear me?
Can you speak up just a little bit louder, or?
Yeah, are you able to hear me
There
now?
we go. Now we can hear you. Thank you. When
Okay,
you begin,
perfect.
we'll begin timing you, okay?
Sure, I can begin. I mean, my point is pretty short and succinct, which is that Hamilton 350 is strongly in support of the Care Fair Transit Initiative. We want to urge City Council to take action now amidst all of the crises that other people are talking about with affordable housing, people not being able to afford food with price inflation. But the sort of unique climate angle that I'd like to put on this is, the question you might ask yourself as a City Council is, why now? Why should we apply a transit subsidy now? What is the urgency? Unfortunately, things are not going to get significantly better. The governments above our municipal level are not taking the action they need to take. We can anticipate that the cost of road maintenance, the cost of food, the cost of lots of things that people need are going to continue to rise. And so what we want to urge Hamilton City Council to do is to think of this as a climate adaptation measure, not just a social assistance measure. This is the kind of thing that's going to allow people to have mobility, to get around during a heat wave to something like a public library where they can cool down, to allow people to not have to rely on vehicles for transport, which also helps to mitigate some of the emissions that Hamilton will have. I think that when we talk about the urgency of the moment, it might be hard to see, but in hindsight, you can look back and you can say that this was the time to take action. Yeah, I think that's a simple message, but please take it to heart that the decisions that you make today will have a huge impact in the years to come.
Thank you, Lucia. Any questions of our delegate? Seeing none, I thank you again for persevering and attending today. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening. We are now moving on to item 3.7, and I'm relying on you, clerk, if someone comes in that's 3.7 and before, you just give me the high sign. Miranda Vander Vliet requesting the 2023 Hamilton Police Service budget, and this is confirmed virtually. Miranda, can you speak so I can hear you?
Can you hear me?
Perfect. Please proceed.
Before I begin my delegation, I just want to say that I stand in solidarity with the folks who demonstrated at City Council on February 6th. I was in the crowd and ceded my time to allow those in the gallery to have their voices heard. I am proud to have been part of the demonstration, and I agree with everything that the demonstrators and delegates said. And I'm proud of my community for advocating for a better Hamilton on their own terms. My delegation today is just to keep this conversation going and to hammer down the point. So good afternoon. My name is Miranda and I live in Hamilton in Ward 1. I'm here today to express my outrage at the proposed 6.71 or roughly $12 million increase to the Hamilton Police Service budget. This absurd increase in the Hamilton Police Service budget comes at the expense of essential services like housing, community health centers, mental health services, sexual assault services, safer infrastructure, playgrounds, youth centers, food accessibility, and harm reduction supports. The police budget has continued to expand over the years, while necessary programs such as social services and community development programs have not received the same level of funding and attention. Police have come to occupy an unnecessary but central role in society, yet it cannot be convincingly argued that police are required for most people's survival. Police intervene in conflicts, yet otherwise they do not keep people alive or improve someone's quality of life. Police intervention is primarily used to manage the comfort and perceived anxieties of people worried about property. They do not feed people, they do not house people, or they do not create healthy communities. And these interventions often end with bodily harm or deadly consequences for others. Police also cannot respond to address social and economic problems that are the source of most conflict and harm. Policing consumes an inordinate amount of resources from our city, and these costs are not justifiable. Unlike investments in harm reduction, food security, and housing, police do not directly create value. Police are used to protect the interests of the wealthy property owners and perceived notions of safety. But an increased police presence also does not keep us safe. It threatens the lives of our most vulnerable communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, the LGBTQ+ community, unhoused people, street-based sex workers, people with disabilities, and people experiencing poverty. Police continue to discriminately target Black and Indigenous communities through tactics of racial profiling, implicit bias, algorithm bias, and etc. In addition to being extremely racist, policing is ableist, sexist, homophobic, and transphobic. Police and the criminalization of our more vulnerable communities create conditions that advance the possibility of harm over time. They don't stop it. A criminalized person loses their capacity to survive. They lose their ability to continue their education, access resources, or maintain employment. The criminalization of our communities then leads to overpolicing, which results in arrests for infractions that go unnoticed in more privileged groups. For example, we can look at the way police interact with encampment residents. Police play an active role in dismantling encampments. They ticket people for living on the streets for simply existing in public, and they destroy property and homes. They've criminalized people just for existing and making it difficult to access resources that they need. Policing and the criminalization of our community members does not protect or improve the city. It only contributes to the vicious cycle of violence. Instead of increasing the police budget, the money should instead be invested in programs created and run by communities to prevent harm and support transformative justice. Rather than using police and surveillance, this money should be used to empower communities to develop and manage programs that work for them. Communities are not monolithic. People have different needs based on their own lived experiences. Therefore, we should be taking a one-size-fits-all approach. Communities experience multiple intersecting avenues of oppression and so require an intersectional approach to care. We should be funding and supporting community-led programs that can meet the needs of everyone. Investing in our communities better addresses the root cause of most criminalized acts, which are often need-based and the consequence of poverty. What we really need are robust services that can effectively respond to these needs, such as mental health outreach workers, community housing centers, and accessible education or prevention programs. We need to reallocate the budget to existing community-led organizations that are offering services to vulnerable communities and create effective alternative services such as crisis intervention, mental health centers, safe consumption sites, and programs that fight against food security and more. These are the services that are needed immediately, and this cannot wait. I ask again, please reject the proposed Hamilton Police Service budget. Choose to invest in programs and services that build healthy and supportive communities.
Thank you, Miranda, for your presentation. Councillors, are there any questions for our delegate? Seeing none, I do thank you for the thought that went into your presentation and your perseverance to be heard today. Thank you very much, Miranda.
Thank you.
The next delegate is Adiola Egbayimi. I'm sure I'm butchering that name, my apologies. From Environment Hamilton, respecting reducing fossil fuel dependence in the city of Hamilton, and this is in person. Let's start with how I pronounce your name, sorry.
Adiola Egbayimi.
Thank you so much. Please proceed when you're ready.
Hello, members of the General Issues Committee. My name is Adiola Egbayimi. I'm a project assistant at Environment Hamilton, and I love my job. And why I love my job is because I get to work on projects like one I'm bringing to you today, the CFFP, the Community Fossil Free Plan. And so this is relevant to you in the scope of climate action, and it builds upon sort of the work that was done in August with the CEEP, part of the climate action strategy of the City of Hamilton. So what I'm doing today is this plan sort of reaches further, and I'm giving you an overview of 6 topics that we've been researching. So the first is monitoring fossil fuel extraction. Within the city limits, there are 250 natural oil and gas wells. 50 of these are active, but over half of these are abandoned, which means they haven't been properly decommissioned. And so these contribute to GHG emissions by way of methane leaks, but as well not to mention the environmental impacts they have on the community. And so we believe the city should assume responsibility for these abandoned wells. And the first step would be, we think, establishing a task force. Secondly, we have prioritizing geothermal energy. So the CEEP identified that buildings was about 14% of GHG emissions in the city, and this is likely because of the natural gas used for space and water heating. We think that geothermal is one promising alternative, and this is because they're pulled from deep underground, and so they can remain a consistent source of energy throughout the year, unlike wind and solar. And actually, there's interesting research on how abandoned wells can be used for geothermal energy, so just putting those two together. And so we believe that the city can vocally support these geo-exchange policies, as well as creating a standardized application process, as at the moment, if you look at the city website, there is none. And this would create further actions, like a foundation for exploring partnerships, creating municipal green development building standards, and as well addressing the Ontario Building Code as well. The third we have is sustainable rental cooling. This is not unique to us in the first step asking for a maximum heat bylaw. So from 1981 to 2010, the average temperature increased 2 degrees in Hamilton. And as we know from the best climate science, this increase will not be linear, it will be exponential. Moving forward, so this looks like, as well, incentivizing retrofits with sustainable cooling systems. Number 4 is developing a green bond initiative. And so GBIs are investments that raise capital for projects with specific environmental benefits. And this has its eyes on the new Climate Change Office, and it looks like developing a carbon budget, hiring consultants, searching for these programs. But one aspect that I'm really excited for is because GBIs are in the realm of those $100 million projects, holding space for community projects so that average citizens can also support those. This is where the city could play a role in providing one-time financial support to create these frameworks to incentivize nonprofits to have their own ones. Number 5 is very interesting, taxation. Municipal pipeline taxes, at the moment, the city is passing the property levy tax bylaw and also the tax rate bylaw. As you know, if you look into each taxable pipeline category, pipelines are one of these classifications. If you look closer, that there's no provincial threshold. This means that council is not restricted on the levy increase you can put on tax on pipelines. And they have sat at 1.79 for years. This is the 3rd lowest tax category. And considering the next negative externalities that pipelines bear on the community, as well as the fact that they are comparable to a large industry, we think that they should be raised to a rate of 2.63, which is what large industry sits at. The last is public pipeline information, because speaking of these pipelines, where are they? There's over a dozen that run through Hamilton, and the last map was made over a decade ago in 2013. Having pipeline information helps monitor community health, prepare emergency services, and also helps inform city staff about foreseeable incidents in the future. So that's it, 6 different transformations that look towards an energy independent city. I want to thank and shout out Ria and Felicia for all the research that they did, as this entire thing has been youth promoted, youth researched, and youth presented. And I also want to thank Carrie Leclerc from Ward 3, and thank you all for your time.
Wow, that was a lot of work. Thank you very much. We do have some councillors. Councillor Nan has some questions for you.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you, Adelo, for coming in today. Thank you so much for your research. Thank you so much for all the young people who've been leading this conversation and coming forward in the comprehensiveness of this delegation today and coming forward with solutions. It is that kind of forethought and engagement that really makes me so excited about who our residents are and what we can be doing together with our residents as a municipal government. I have a question for you. You mentioned the 250 natural gas wells and that 50 of them have not been decommissioned. The research that's been done on this, has it been shared with the city in any formal way?
Thank you for your question. And I'll just adjust that was 50 of them which are actively drilling, and over half that haven't been properly decommissioned, i.e. are abandoned orphan wells. So that puts it more at the range at about 150 of these. So that research was drawn from the Oil and Gas Library of Ontario, operating out of London, Ontario. And in terms of the second part of your question, you'll have to repeat that part.
Whether or not this information, to your knowledge, this research that you all have been working on has been shared with the city in any formal capacity?
In terms of that transformation, no. However, each of these 6 topics has been broached on a different level with city staff, and part of our process is our next step is hoping to be consulting with city staff in terms of feedback, adjustments, and whatnot. So for that topic specifically, hasn't been shared, but some of the others have.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And then the final question, if I could, through you, Chair, is on the pipeline taxation, which was, could you go over the numbers on that one for me again, please?
Yes, please.
Sure. So pipeline, the PT category within the tax levy bylaw, and this was, we looked at the 2021 and 2020. They sat at a rate of 1.79. And this was consulted with staff in the taxation department. And what we found that there was no provincial limit. And then for the large industry rate was 2.63. And because that one does have a limit, it's either increasing or decreasing slightly at a rate that's in conjunction with the province. Meanwhile, pipelines have been stagnant.
Flatlined. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much for your research and bringing this information forward. If you have anything written in a breakdown of those 6 points and you're willing to share it with the committee, you could always email it to clerk@hamilton.ca. That will enable all of council to consider your delegation in written form as well. Thank you.
That would be very helpful also. But don't go away. We have another councillor. Councillor Alex Wilson, please.
Thanks, Adiola, and all the folks at Environment Hamilton for coming out today, but also for all the work that went into this. I know, like Ria and some others have been working on some of these for a really long time, and so it's nice to see that research coming forward. One of the questions I have is specifically about that. Youth are on the front lines, and youth are oftentimes the ones pushing decision makers and policy makers to move further, faster, because it's our future that's on the line. And sometimes that's an emergency or an urgency that's not felt by everyone. Is there enough spaces in the current way that we talk about climate policy and climate justice, climate action in our city for youth to lead the way and for youth to have a front and center kind of driving force in this conversation? Or do you find that you're often pushing for your voice to be part of the formal process?
That's a great question. The first thing it reminds me of is within the Climate Change Initiatives Office, one of the things that they'll be implementing is I believe, a roundtable, a task force on climate. And in the breakdown, one thing that I think would be especially relevant in terms of putting youth at the forefront is creating a space for one of the committee members, or 2 or 3, to be youth, just so. Yeah, in terms of climate action, oftentimes, for me, for example, I save the youth part onto the end so that the points could stand on their own merit, and then bring in the youth at the end, just because there is that connotation that youth aren't as incisive with different policies they make or different things that they're pushing for. But I hope this can be a little bit of a testament to the clear-mindedness that youth in this city have in terms of climate action and bold climate action. And yeah.
Councillor?
Thank you, and I really appreciate that you brought that up, because I think you also brought up the case of abandoned oil and gas wells. And that's something that, you know, up until a couple of years ago, no one was talking about that until the town of Wheatley exploded. And so as, you know, in my former work, I hosted a town hall on this issue, and we were the only provincial office in all of Ontario to talk about this issue. There's a huge Hamilton problem, but we've had a town that blew up. There's still no justice for the people in that town. Yeah. We know in Norfolk County there's water poisoning now happening because of abandoned oil and gas wells. So, you know, when you spoke about how oftentimes youth voices are not seen as accurate or maybe as informed, could you speak a little bit about some of the biases that coming up against? Because you're talking about something that, if we were operating rationally, we would be talking about the fact that a town exploded, that groundwater is being poisoned by these wells, and that industry has left taxpayers on the hook. But it seems that only young voices are bringing that forward. Could you talk about maybe some of the biases we need to unlearn or confront that are stopping us from having these rational conversations?
Sure. I think from my perspective, and it won't cover all of the youth perspectives, I do want to be sure on that, it comes from a really systemic view and an intersectional view as well. So for example, the reason that these wells weren't properly decommissioned is because there's no economic incentive to do so. It's not profitable for companies to properly attend to environmental concerns like oil and gas drilling. They drill, they get the money, and then they leave, the community. And oftentimes, if on the intersectional note, if the community is more racialized, in deeper harms. And so I think that the youth perspective of, yes, we're coming to you with these higher level, fully formed thoughts, but there is always a systemic look on how different systems of capitalism, how different systems of racial injustice are really underpinning a lot of these environmental crises. That's my perspective on it.
Thank you. Councillor?
Last question for me, kind of keeping on this like you brought forward really researched policy recommendations, also coming from a lot of young people that brought this forward. To me, that seems, and maybe I'm speaking personally here, that there's an appetite for green jobs. There's an appetite to be part of this conversation and cleaning up wells, getting rid of emissions, installing heat pumps. These are all jobs that we're talking about. We're talking about a green stimulus funding in a lot of ways. Are there ways that as we're doing that economic development, as we're investing in a greener future for our city, we're investing in our competitive advantage, what does that look like in terms of how can we partner and maybe ensure that that labor piece is not forgotten and that good green jobs are part of this proposal as well?
I think that's a fantastic question because I did start this presentation with, oh my gosh, I love my job. And I have talked about it a lot. I'm really fortunate to have recently graduated in a political science degree and then immediately be employed in a environmental political science job and be so quickly able to present to all of you here. And I think that's a rare opportunity. And I think that's really unfortunate. Because we don't have those gaps of places where youth can put their creativity and their inspiration into really relevant policy decisions like this. And I think part of where that comes from is just the not wanting the nonprofit sector to be saturated, but also looking towards these spaces in the community that need staff funding. The Environment Hamilton is quite small, and so just seeing that there aren't a lot of those opportunities, but feeling really grateful to fit into one makes me think about the funding of these spaces, how they're applying for grants, where those grants are available from, and the range of those grants too.
Councillor, follow-up?
Thank you so much, Adiola, for coming out today, and thanks to Environment Hamilton.
Any further delegates? Or Councillor Wilson? Councillor Maureen Wilson, please.
Thank you very much. I really found that very informative and very helpful, so thank you. Councillor Nan asked my questions with the exception of, on the tax rate, did your work inform you of, is that unique to Hamilton, or are you able to speak to any sort of comparative analysis of if other jurisdictions may be moving beyond that base rate that you referenced? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. That's a fantastic question. And on the topic of pipelines, since there's no provincial, we didn't think to look to others, as other cities are, in fact, also able to increase. And that was actually, in terms of the breakdown of different subsections we have within these points, a lot of things we said was Hamilton should advocate to other municipalities to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. On the topic of the oil and gas wells, there's about 15,000 in Ontario. And so there are many cities that can, if we take the lead, I think this is an opportunity for us to be a leader in terms of Ontario, in terms of things that we've already done environmentally, and take other municipalities along with us on this climate action journey. I'm not sure, although it is helpful to have comparative analysis, some of these can be taken in very bold stride, not needing other municipalities to sort of do it first, but to be the bold one.
Councillor?
No, thank you. I very much agree. I think it is time for us to turn Hamilton exceptionalism on its head and to lead and define a new competitive advantage and stewardship. And I know, at least speaking on behalf of myself, I'll be following up with our finance staff and the like to pursue this further. And I just wanted to thank you again.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further? Vice Chair Danko, if you can take the chair just for a second, please. Our delegate has most certainly intrigued me in a number of ways. With respect to the decommissioning of the natural gas wells, there's 150 approximately that have not been decommissioned. In your studies, did you reveal which level of government has the sphere of authority to address those issues?
Thank you for your question. No, I did not.
Okay, we're going to have to dig into that one. And on the taxes on the pipelines, again, that is very intriguing to me, given that this municipality, as well as others, are spending more on climate change abatement issues and mitigations, to be quite frank. and we may not be taxing the pipeline in the appropriate level that we could deal with. So are you aware of other municipalities that have been tackling this issue, or are they just forgotten that they can tax pipelines?
I'm not at this moment aware of other municipalities, but I think in the realm of political savviness, that increase can be beneficial for the city in terms of that extra money being funneled into projects. And it's great that the other one of interest to this council right now is important, as special interest, as they're all very interesting, is the decommissioning of wells as well, because I think in terms of stewardship and in terms of showing the city that they care about environmental issues, those two are really pertinent, and I think can be taken with a lot of urgency, as I tend to communicate in a very calm manner, but all of these are of utmost importance of doing it now and looking at it now for the climate emergency.
Thank you for that. And finally, Vice Chair Danko, with respect to the pending wells that need to be decommissioned, do you have any indication as to the amount of methane gas or natural gas that could seep from a well that has not been decommissioned? How prevalent is that?
That's a good question. To my knowledge, that will range on how poorly the space has been abandoned, and that's information that I don't have, and one that I think the city should be responsible, include that in the task force of scoping out.
Thank you. I think Councillor Wilson and Nan, or the two Wilsons, I should say, we're intrigued by this, and I think you'll find that this council does inquire further to try and understand better what's happening and what the impact is in our community and how we can address it. So sincerely, I really appreciate, as previous speakers have said, the amount of work that you have done in research. It's been very helpful today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited to follow up with the relevant staff and councillors.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're moving on to our next speaker, which is item 3.9 on our agenda. Miles Demeter, respecting the 2023 budget, and this is an in-person presentation. Is Miles present? No? Thank you. Wish to confirm that item 3.10, Mike Burnett of Acorn, respecting the 2023 municipal budget. He's indicated that he's not attending. Is that correct, Madam Clerk? Thank you. Item 3.11, Aidan Amer, Hamilton 350, respecting support for Care Fair campaign initiative. This is in person and has been confirmed. No? Okay, we'll come back to them one more time. Item number 312 is Ken Stone, Community Coalition Against Racism, respecting the 2023 Hamilton Police Services budget, and this will be a pre-recorded video. Are we ready to give that a shot now? You know how much I love technology.
On behalf of the Community Coalition Against Racism, I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to present 3 reasons why it should deny the Hamilton Police Service its requested budget increase of $12.3 million. First, to approve the requested increase in the police budget, City Council would have to ignore the demands of tens of millions of people around the world and thousands in Hamilton who marched and demonstrated that at least some of the funding for police be reallocated to services which alleviate social problems such as homelessness, hunger, mental illness, and addiction, all of which often result in calls to police. Furthermore, the disruption that occurred during the previous GIC meeting indicates that there is widespread public opposition to this increase. $12 million is a lot of money on top of last year's very large police budget, which constitutes almost 20% of the total city budget. In fact, with a homeless winter encampment right behind City Hall, with a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure deficit, and with food banks that cannot keep up with demand, spending almost 20% of the city's budget on policing is excessive. Secondly, people around the world, including citizens of Hamilton, took to the streets following the racist police killing of George Floyd in 2020. In Hamilton, racism has been endemic in policing for decades, starkly indicated by CCAR's fight against carding and racial profiling, when HPS internal stats were finally released showing that police stopped Hamiltonians of color and Indigenous origin at a rate often several times that of white Hamiltonians. The number of high-profile incidents from the past showed that Hamilton police regularly acted in a racist and sometimes brutal, malicious, and even deadly fashion towards Hamiltonians of color and Indigenous origin. Just last year on August 22nd, an Indigenous man, Patrick Tomchuk, was brutalized during an arrest at a local gasoline station. Fortunately, a witness recorded the incident and the arresting officer was charged. Audrey Davis, director of the Hamilton Regional Indian Center, quite reasonably called for police body cameras to become mandatory rather than rely on chance passersby to record disreputable conduct on the part of police. In October of 2022, Marcus Charles, a Hamiltonian of color, was unacceptably tasered by police while suffering an epileptic seizure. Racist acts by Hamilton police cannot be blamed on a few bad apples. Back in the 1990s, Hamilton Police Chief Ken Robertson was the first to admit that systemic racism existed in Hamilton policing. Actually, it exists in all Canadian policing, and an inevitable result of 400 years of capitalist colonialism in this country, during which the slavery of people of color was legal, and the Indian Act required that Native people be restricted to reservations. But I haven't seen in the HPS budget any item that might indicate it might be trying to develop a new model of policing, of anti-oppression policing. Thirdly, the militarization of policing in Hamilton should be reversed. The armored cars should be sold, the tactical and mounted units disbanded, and the semi-automatic carbines installed on police cars removed. Measures which militarize police mitigate against the idea that the police should serve and protect the public, and instead replace it with an image of police that's meant to menace and dominate. A lot of savings could be garnered by demilitarizing the police. In our view, then, the HPS should not be rewarded with a budget increase this year. It shouldn't get increases until there is a year in which there are no more incidents such as the Tomchuk assault and the tasering of Marcus Charles. When it demilitarizes and when there are no out-of-court settlements for discreditable conduct on behalf of sworn officers, and when there are measurable improvements in respect to delivering bias-free policing to communities of color, Native origin, religious minorities, and the LGBTQ+. The HPS should be subject to a report card on bias-free policing each and every year before submitting its budget. Let's use the $12.3 million for other priorities this year. Thank you for your kind attention.
Our next pre-recorded video is item 3.13, Nicole Tolinar, respecting comments on the 2023 budget.
Greetings, Madam Mayor and members of the General Issues Committee. My name is Nicole Tolinar and I live in Hamilton, Ontario in Ward 3. I'm here to express my concern regarding the proposed increase to the police services budget. Investing millions into a policing budget that already has an unused surplus from the previous year is a waste of our resources. Likewise, in 2021, the police kept a $2.1 million budget surplus. In the city's 2022 budget breakdown of the distribution of tax dollars, the HPS budget accounted for approximately 15% of the overall total. Social services accounted for about half that at 8% of the budget. The HPS takes the biggest chunk of our taxes, And I don't see this translating, nor could it translate into rent geared to income or affordable housing, into improved food security, improved income security, or increased access to mental health supports. I believe that when one entity, aka the HPS, takes more of the budget, then other vital services are left with less. For example, City Housing Hamilton, which is in desperate need of funds, has an annual operating budget currently of $51 million. In 2021, the police had more than 3 times the operating budget of City Housing Hamilton. If they were approved for the increase, it would be about 4 times. As someone who works in the social services sector, it's incredibly clear to myself, my coworkers, and many of the folks that I have the honor of serving that pouring more funding into policing is not a feasible, rational, or just option. When Chief Frank Bergen tried to rationalize the $12 million budget increase to City Council in January, he himself said, "We are not the answer for everything. We are not the default service provider." However, in the social service sector, we sometimes work alongside Coast, MCERT, and SMP, otherwise known as a Social Navigator Program. In 2022, the SMP program was expanded. However, they run into the same issues that we do and often circulate or bring clients back through the shelter system. The issue being is that they run into the same issues that we do, such as adequate shelter, lack of warming centers, lack of day centers, and lack of affordable and rent geared to income housing. My issue is that our tax dollars are being used to multiply police and police adjacent workers, but the amount of shelter beds and permanent and affordable and rent geared to income housing is still woefully inadequate. The police shouldn't be the default service providers. They're right. However, they are consistently given the largest chunk of our taxes. It's time to reinvest in our community and redistribute our taxes in a more equitable and just manner that actually addresses the root causes of many of these issues, such as living without housing, intense poverty, lack of income security, OW and ODSP being woefully inadequate to afford housing. We need to address these things rather than criminalize them, and I don't see these things being addressed by increasing the policing budget. The best way to address social ills is to address our lack of social care. We have community supports that are dangerously underfunded, which are better equipped to respond to the issues that we have in Hamilton. As your constituent, you represent me. Refusing to act upon the needs of the communities and constituents that you represent is a failure. I'm not comfortable continuing to fund policing in my community at the expense of essential services such as affordable and rent geared to income housing, community health centers, adequate warming centers and shelters, day centers, safe consumption sites, and alternative crisis intervention services. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next delegate is item 3.14, Laura Katz, respecting the 2023 Hamilton Police budget, and this is again a pre-recorded video.
Hello, I am Laura Katz, and I'm sending this in from Ward 1 today. Good afternoon, or maybe evening. I am asking councillors to please vote against the proposed police budget increase. Considering their budget has increased year after year, and they haven't even spent their 2022 budget, it honestly seems like a prank that they're even asking for more. And given the data, it's very disheartening that they are very likely to get an increase. So I'm here to reiterate that I am not comfortable funding police in my community at the expense of essential services like housing, arguably one of the biggest crises that the city currently faces. And to not be addressing this first and foremost before considering indulging HPS in this request is simply unconscionable. Hamilton's website professes that the budget will support the city's strategic plan and vision to be the best place to raise a child and age successfully. Now we know that there is a 23-year gap in life expectancy from the neighborhood in Hamilton with the highest life expectancy, 87.7 years. I'm assuming that's my neighborhood, to the one with the lowest at 64.8 years. That's a 23-year gap in Hamilton. This is from the McMaster Institute for Research on Aging. This is alarming to say the least. I've reviewed the breakdown of the city budgets from 2018 to 2022 that are available online, and it sickens me to see the police budget rise year after year when education is at a plateau and social services is decreasing. Here is a very simple line graph of budget allocations from 2018 to 2022. Here is the police budget from 2018 to 2022, education and social services 2018 to 2022. So why are social services decreasing year after year? It is critically underfunded, and we are seeing this every single day. Take food banks, for example. Last year, in a joint study between Hamilton Food Share and McMaster, they showed that 53,000 people have accessed the system in the last 6 months. An estimated 12,500 unique people visit one of 11 Hamilton-based food banks at least once a year, while 58% of those visit once a month. They found that 46% of those accessing this support would be homeless without it. Another staggering stat, 96% of users pay more than 30% of their income on housing. Close to 38% are paying over 60%. So this to me is a justifiable reason to allocate more of the city's budget to social services. How does HPS justify their annual increase requests? Where is this data? The good news is that I actually have high hopes for this council. Hopes that you can start addressing the problems upstream. Hopes that you can funnel resources into people-centered supports and community-based care. Hopes that this council does clearly see that what we desperately need is for the city to fund deeply affordable housing and mental health care services. Hopes that this council sees that indulging in this police request is not addressing anything upstream at all, but will only bring more violence to the most vulnerable members of our communities. So with that, and with permission from my 7-year-old, here is a video from when she was 5 explaining that when you have a lot and someone else has a little, that there is a solution.
So the money comes out and we have this much money and some people don't have no money. So we give them some money and we have money and they have a little and they have some money.
That's it from me. So thank you very much for your time and for listening.
That must have been one of our youngest delegates ever. Item 3.15 is Marnie Shooter of Acorn respecting the 2023 municipal budget. This is again a pre-recorded video.
Record.
Hello, City Councilors. My name is Marnie Schurter. I am co-chair of the Hamilton Mountain ACORN chapter. I am delegating today with ACORN and our allies. Today as part of the Just Recovery Coalition for a More Equitable Hamilton. ACORN is a multi-use membership-based community union of low to moderate income people. We believe that social and economic justice can best be achieved by building community power for change. Our central purpose is to effectively request and champion the interests of low, moderate income citizens on critical issues of social and economic justice. Some of the things that we have accomplished with the city is landlord licensing pilot in wards 1, 8, and 14. We've done an expansion of the tenant defense fund, and we've been hired, and we've hired the city has hired a consultant for renovation. My delegation today is about the landlord licensing. In particular, I'm referring to 123, 125 Bold Street, where the landlord and owners are not taking proper care of the building. For example, no heat, rodents, bed bugs, no running water, cracks in ceilings falling in. There needs to be working stoves, fridges, washers, and dryers, just to name a few things. The development of a citywide landlord licensing policy would protect tenants from substandard housing conditions and restrict renovictions based on this Rent Safe program from Toronto and New Westminster, BC. We need to put the burden of tenant displacement on landlords on the landlord's plate. In New Westminster, landlords has to enter a new lease with the tenant at the same rent with tenant agreement, or provide accommodations at the same rent during duration of renovation. A safe, clean home is a human right. I am asking the city to take proactive steps to stop the landlords like the ones on Bold Street from continuing their destruction of people's homes. It is the elderly, disabled, and people with mental health issues that are most effective. We need to show that no matter who you are, that all residents are entitled to safe and healthy homes. Thank you for listening. We need a budget that prioritizes tenants' issues.
Thank you. Our next speaker is a pre-recorded video from Gord Smythe of Acorn respecting the 2023 municipal budget. Don't you love when those pre-recorded tapes don't work? There we go.
I am Gordon Smythe, and I am delegating from Acorn and joining the Just Recovery Coalition. I am delegating today to urge the city to pass a budget that prioritizes investments for low-income, vulnerable Hamilton residents. Being homeless in 2021 was a constant struggle for me. The lack of stable housing made it difficult for me to access basic necessities like food, clean water, and health care. The uncertainty of where I would sleep each night took a toll on my mental health, causing feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. The eviction crisis only added to my difficulties as I was forced to leave my home and community, further disrupting my already unstable life. This experience has had a devastating impact on me, causing long-term harm to my physical and mental well-being. The trauma of being displaced and losing my sense of security and belonging has been difficult to overcome. The systemic issues that contribute to homelessness, such as a lack of affordable housing, poverty, and discrimination, only compound to the difficulties I face in my journey to stability and security. The City of Hamilton must pass a strong tenant assistance and rental replacement policy based on the tenant assistance policy from Burnaby, British Columbia, applied to all building sizes. If demolition permits are approved, landlords must be responsible for allowing tenants to choose between accepting temporary accommodation of comparable size and location at the same rent they were paying before, or rental top-up should the tenant choose to find their own temporary accommodation. The rental top-up would cover the difference between their original rent and rent of their temporary accommodation. Help for tenants to find a new place in moving assistance. Tenant's choice of an insured moving company arranged by the landlord, or compensation. Extra support for vulnerable tenants, transportation to view interim housing units, and packing assistance for those with mobility impairments. Granting tenants the right to return to the redeveloped building at the same rent, plus any Residential Tenancy Act rent act increases in a unit with the same number of bedrooms. Units lost to redevelopment must be replaced at a ratio of 1:1 or 30% of the total number of proposed units, whichever is greater. Replaced units must be replaced on site. Developers cannot opt out of rental replacement or be allowed to replace off-site. By requiring one-on-one rental replacement on-site would effectively ban the approval of demolition permits within existing rental buildings, i.e. landlords want to reconfigure the number and size. Some additional demands: tenant protections and approval of demolition permits should not be tied to vacancy rates. A vacancy rate of over 3% does not mean low-income tenants will have an easier time finding affordable housing. Any tenant engagement and required tenant meetings must include a representative from the City of Hamilton and community groups that support tenant rights if requested. For example, Hamilton Community Legal Clinic or ACORN. All written communication to tenants must be translated with common languages spoken by tenants in the buildings, and translation services must be provided at tenant meetings. Tenants must be given 100 days notice of a move-out day, 60 extra on top of 120 days required by the Residential Tenancies Act. Temporary accommodation and rental top-ups only expire once the redevelopment is complete, and tenants can exercise their right of first refusal. Building maintenance must continue after a notice of demolition. Frequent communication to tenants during the redevelopment to share timeline on returning to units. The conversion of rental housing into condominiums. Conversion of rental units to condos has no benefit for renters and only further contributes to the housing crisis. Thank you for listening to my delegation.
Okay, councillors, we have an additional speaker here. Item 3.11, Aidan Amir of Hamilton 350, respecting support for Care Fair campaign initiative. Come on down. We're glad you made it. Yep.
All right. Hi.
Perfect.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and General Issues Committee, for allowing me to loop back here. I apologize. I had a bio lab, and unfortunately, I can't dissect a rat fast enough to be here, but we made it. I'm also getting over a bit of some food poisoning, so my throat's a bit raw. I apologize for that. But yes, hello everyone. My name is Dana Mayer, and although I'm a first-generation immigrant, I've called Hamilton my home for 16 years. I've had every graduation, job, relationship, and subsequent breakup in the city. So you can say I really do care about what goes on in Hamilton. And the reason why I'm here is to show my support for the HDLC's Care Fair program. Why? Because there's a great divide in how we allow people to traverse the city. On the one hand, you have those who are privileged enough to have a car or many cars for transportation. And on the other hand, you have folks who have enough money to afford a bus pass or a taxi, or maybe they have the physical capacity to bike and walk around. Even those who carpool have a certain level of social capital that allows that to be an option. And yet that leaves a huge section of the population behind, primarily people with disabilities who live with and without benefits, young students, and those above the age of 60, which is a demographic that is especially stricken by poverty in the city. Mobility, or the ability to move freely, is a right that we often take for granted. For those who are privileged enough, there's rarely a second thought when you have to go out for lunch, go see your elderly parents, or go get groceries. You possess a sense of agency over your life such that you don't really have to worry about not getting to where you want to go. Why is it that we're okay with denying that agency to those who are not of working age or who don't produce the same amount of economic capital from their labor as the upper stratus of society? I've witnessed firsthand and experienced firsthand the struggle of protecting that agency as a young high school student with very little money of my own. For example, I'm a tutor at Pathways to Education, which is an amazing organization that provides free academic and emotional support to students, secondary students in the downtown core. In addition, the center offers a very limited number of free bus tickets. You will not believe the amount of students who need to scrounge for cash or hope that they can get a free bus ticket just to get to school and back. Or they might need tickets to get to tutoring because a lot of them are newcomers who are learning English along with their regular curriculum, or they're students who work jobs to help support their families, or students who need to take care of dependent family members. Paying $3.25 twice or thrice a day is not chump change. You could also say, well, if their parents have a car, why not just let them drive them everywhere? Well, being dependent on your parents every time is simply not the safest option, despite how much we want to kid ourselves that it is. There will be many times when you have to make important decisions that need to be kept confidential. Many teenage girls and marginalized women need to seek crucial reproductive health care they can't turn to their family or friends. While their peers are learning or joking around in class, those girls spend hours planning out bus routes that can potentially take them to a clinic as far out as Mississauga or Toronto and back with just $5 and change and a 2-hour transfer limit. If you've not been in that position, you'll never understand the amount of fear and isolation a person experiences in that moment. There are many more examples that I could bring up if I had more than 5 minutes, and yet the two that I've listed still drive home the necessity for accessible and affordable public transit. In the end, please remember this: the people who are speaking here today can afford to do so. You're effectively making decisions on behalf of a majority of those who cannot be here. Keep that in mind when you're choosing your priorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any questions for our guest? Councillor Alex Wilson, please.
Thanks, Dan. You talked a lot about the equity piece of a care fair and how it helps other folks get around our city. There's also a cost to how we get around, whether that's the air quality from cars, the cost of gas, we know all these types of things. Could you speak a little bit about how we maybe subsidize different types of mobility in the city, and where is there funding and where not? So for example, do you pay a fee to use your car every time? Do you pay a fee to use the bus? A little bit more about, who are we as taxpayers or as a council subsidizing to get around our city, and who are we asking to pay for their own way?
Absolutely. Like I said, I'm just here to support the Hamilton District Labour Council's plan, so I'm sure they have a bit more of the details, but as far as I know, there are ways, I'm sure there are ways to fund it. I mean, clearly there's a lot of hurrah about what we're doing with our tax dollars at the moment. And, if my colleague Adiola's plan goes through, then, we have extra income from, pipeline taxation and all that. I do think it is a very important conversation to be made. And of course, that money isn't coming out of nowhere. But I do think trying to say that I don't want to divert the attention from the conversation to focus on that, especially since my knowledge isn't in that aspect. But it is a very great question, and I would love to, maybe outside of this, mention that, show you that program.
Thank you. Councillor, supplemental?
Yeah, no, that was my question. Thanks so much, Adan. And as someone who hasn't been able to pay for the HSR in the past 5 years, I agree with what you're saying. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further councillors wishing to ask Adana any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your perseverance. We appreciate your report today. Councillors, I'm just going to go through the delegates that we have missed to see if they've come in the room. Elizabeth Bloomfield and Jacqueline Cantar and Kara Youngjulen, Miles Demeter, and Mike Barnett, we already knew had declined. So that is the end of our delegates. At the moment, I would need a mover and a seconder to receive all of the delegates from today and from the February 6th date. Moved by Councillor Taddison, seconded by Councillor Spatafora. And that would be an electronic vote. How's that electronic vote working for you, Councillor Jackson?
Traditional thought.
Councillor Pauls, are you still with us?
And that vote carried 15-0. Madam Clerk, is it appropriate for us to give direction to staff, or can we do that? I don't see why we can't.
Yeah,
but
I'm
I
at the
thought
will
I'd
of
ask.
committee. Should committee wish to put motions forward?
So I think there was interest around the room with regards to the taxation issue. Councillor Nan, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Would it be at this point to mention a notice of motion coming forward for, would it be to, March 1st Budget Committee regarding the pipeline taxation rate, and the therefore be it resolved that I'm working on with staff and other colleagues around the table is that staff report back on the options to increase the tax rate on the pipeline class, thereby decreasing the burden on other property classes, including residential.
Thank you. Any debate on the motion, or we need a seconder? It's a notice of motion. Okay. It can be a motion because it actually came out of the discussion here today, so it's up to you.
Thank you for that consideration, Chair. Really appreciate it. Yeah? Do folks feel ready to go on it? Awesome.
I don't
All right.
see anyone objecting.
Cool beans.
Councillor.
Then I will just copy and paste, and much thanks to General Manager Zagaric and staff team in helping assemble the language here, and I'll put it into an email to clerk so that you have all these fantastic words.
Perfect.
And it's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Wilson over there.
Alex Wilson or Maureen Wilson?
They're going to fight over it.
They're going to fight over it. Okay, so it's Councillor Alex Wilson. He won the toss.
There you go. And my apologies, Chair, just give me a second here.
No problem.
There we go. So it's sent over to you, Clerk, but the motion reads, whereas the City of Hamilton approves an annual tax policy report, and whereas tax policies impact the city financially in terms of revenue streams and their sources, and have the potential to distribute the tax burden across property taxes. And whereas in 2022, Council approved the following tax ratios broken down into the chart that will be in the motion once displayed, and indicates the provincial threshold, and clearly indicates what our delegate confirmed for us, that pipeline tax ratio does not include a provincial threshold. Whereas the city realized approximately $4.9 million in municipal tax revenue from the pipeline in 2022, pipeline class in 2022, and whereas the education tax rate on pipeline class is determined by the province of Ontario, and whereas the City of Hamilton declared a climate emergency in 2019, and whereas the city has a weighty reliance on residential taxpayers, therefore be it resolved that staff report back on the options to increase the tax rate on the pipeline class, geez Louise, thereby decreasing the burden on other property classes, including residential.
That makes sense to me. Any questions with regards to the motion or debate on the motion? Councillor Maureen Wilson, please.
Thank you. I'm very happy to see this motion, and through the chair, I'd also, again, on behalf of myself, and I assure many of my colleagues, thank the delegate for bringing it to our attention. I do have a question, if I could, through you to staff. I do want to give a shout out to Councillor Danko, who, as I recall last term, when we were deliberating the prospect of an additional or an extension to a pipeline, was making some very good queries about a gas tax, if you will. And if I could understand the distinction through you to Mr. Zagaric, is it because we're talking about the line as opposed to the content? I just would like some clarity. Thank you.
Thank you. General Manager Zagaric, please.
So through the chair, Mike Zagaric, General Manager, Finance Corporate Services. Municipal councils have the authority to levy taxes on assets, pipeline assets, as they do other assets such as industrial facilities or commercial facilities, versus the commodity that is transferred within that asset.
All right. Yep. Thank you. And I just shout out to Councillor Danko, who is swimming in that pool, and thank you again to the delegate for getting us here.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments on the motion? Councillor Wang, please. Thank you.
I'm sorry I missed this delegation. So I'm hoping to get a little more clarity. What is the difference between pipeline and then industrial large?
Thank you. General Manager Zagaric, please.
Through the chair, those are on the far left side, those descriptions relate to various property classes. So again, a residential class, multi-residential, commercial, industrial large. There are different classes of industrial, and then pipeline, landfills, and farms. So again, those are all simply the various property classes that tax ratios are set for, and ultimately tax rates are determined for.
Sir Wang.
Could you provide a touch more clarity as to who are the customers that are in the pipeline class? Through you, Chair.
Thank you. General Manager Zagaric.
So through the chair, it would be utilities, pipeline utilities like a Enbridge, for example, given that they were recently before council. And as it relates to those assets, MPAC determines the assessed value of those assets. And then as it relates to the tax ratios, is the municipality sets the tax ratios. You'll note on the far right side of that chart is the provincial government restricts the tax ratios for some classes. So you'll note that in earlier meetings I mentioned the industrial, because our tax ratio is greater than the provincial cap, is we can only pass on industrial 50% of the tax increase. So again, the far right side speaks to the cap that the provincial government sets, and as our delegate tonight identified, there is no provincial threshold for a pipeline class. So therefore, that is a piece of work city staff can review, and in determining what that tax ratio, ultimately, the higher the tax ratio, the greater the revenue that the municipality would generate, and consequently, the offset would be a reduction in the tax rates for other classes. So it's not a revenue generating opportunity, it's an opportunity to shift the tax burden across classes.
That is very helpful. Thank you, Chair. Those are all my questions.
Excellent. Councillor Cameron Crutch, please.
Thank you. And through the chair, let's get into the math. My favorite. I just want to make sure I understand what you said, General Manager Zagaric. I'm going to propose a couple of friendly amendments to the motion. So if I look at that chart, I'm looking at industrial large, and I'm just going across with my eyes all the way over here. And I just want to make sure I understand exactly what happened. The 2021 final tax ratio for industrial large is 3.8102, and it looks like we lowered that slightly in the 2022 to 3.7506. But because there's a provincial threshold there for 2.63. So my first question to you is, why are we even bothering to post these higher numbers in these categories if we're held to a threshold that's lower?
General Manager Zagaric.
Through the chair, what the councillor's highlighting is the fact that because we have that restriction of 50% of the tax increase, what you'll see is each and every year the industrial tax ratio will decrease because, again, we're restricted to only pass on 50% onto the industrial. You'll see that as well with the multi-residential. Again, because we exceed that threshold of 2 on the multi-residential, we cannot pass on any assessment increases to multi-residential or tax increases to multi-residential. So for those two classes, going forward, excluding any changes in provincial legislation, if the current restrictions extend in the future, those two classes, we will continue each and every year reporting a decrease in those tax ratios until such time as they align to those provincial thresholds. If multi-residential at some point aligns to 2% or 2 times the residential, then that class will no longer be protected.
Councillor, supplemental?
Thank you. If you could expand a little bit about when you say 50%, what you mean, because we're talking about applying the number 50% to these numbers. There's not an obvious mathematical understanding of that term. So could you just unpack what you mean by that when you're speaking about these specific numbers?
Thank you.
So through the chair, the 50% speaks to the tax increase. So if I draw from the last presentation staff made on the 2023 budget, we sat at approximately 7% residential tax increase. For the industrial classes, we would be passing on 50% of the residential increase, so 3.5%. And consequently, the math is that because the industrial tax burden is half of the residential, is that ratio keeps decreasing. Now, for industrial, it will likely take a decade and a half to align to that provincial threshold. That is a long journey in terms of the industrial class. With the multi-residential, what we've seen is a decrease of about 13%, 15% since 2017, but a big factor to that is assessment and reassessment, not just the tax burden. So again, short answer is the 50% speaks to 50% of the residential tax increase, and currently that would be somewhere in approximately 3.5%.
Councillor?
Thank you. I think we're getting there. I have a couple more questions about the numbers. So can you, it's back to my first question, but I'm looking for more of a moral answer, I suppose, in a way. I know we're on the decrease, right? I get that. We're decreasing the tax rate right, until we get closer and closer to the provincial threshold. We're on the way. Meanwhile, we chose that tax rate for some kind of a reason. So if the provincial threshold did not exist, right? Are we there? Yeah. So why is it that number? Why is it 3.75? Apart from the fact that it's decreasing, why is it so much higher than the provincial threshold?
Yeah. So through the chair, now I appreciate the councillor asking this question again. I think I understand the question. It very much is historical. These tax ratios go back to when industry represented 75% of our assessment base. And when one traveled down Burlington Street and saw Fortune 500 industries reflected on Burlington Street. And so the high tax ratios is not unique to Hamilton. Older industrial municipalities like Windsor, like Sudbury, like Hamilton have these legacy tax ratios that reflected their previous reliance on industry. And again, that is why we have higher tax ratios. And because we have tax ratios greater than the provincial threshold, they continue to be a protected class.
Councillor?
So in a way, though I appreciate the 2.63 provincial threshold as a way for us to be guided here, there's something, what's the word I'm looking for? Something arbitrary about that number specifically, because it doesn't apply to an historical context for pipelines, it doesn't apply to any kind of other context for pipelines. It's the number we're picking. When we have the sky as the limit, we could just as easily pick 3.7506 as the threshold that we're looking at. And so I'm just wondering if when staff's responding to this, how that's playing into this. I want to make sure that I understand exactly what's going to happen here, so that we are able to make a decision and move forward. Is there a context in which we understand there to be an historical evaluation of a threshold with respect to pipeline taxes above the current amount?
Mr. Zagarek?
So through the chair, in terms of if the pipeline, if council were to amend the pipeline tax ratio to increase it, the offset would be a decrease to all other classes, It's not a discretionary offset. It's mathematical requirement in terms of how legislation works. And so the tax ratios for all classes except residential is fixed at 1, would decrease, and recognizing that pipelines represent approximately $5 million. It would be a slight decrease for all other classes, but there would be a corresponding decrease to the other classes. Again, it's not a revenue generating exercise, it's a redistribution of tax burden exercise.
Councillor, you got about a minute left.
That redistribution, would it not include residential taxes?
I'm sorry, through the chair, if the councillor could repeat his question, I didn't hear.
Would that redistribution include or not include residential taxes because they're already a ratio of 1?
Through the chair, multi-residential would decrease. Residential is constantly fixed at 1.
Okay, that's an important distinction. So you're saying that wouldn't impact residential taxes specifically, but would impact all the other classes that aren't residential taxes.
Mr. Zagarek?
Yeah. Through the chair, it wouldn't impact the, sorry for clarity, it would not impact the residential tax ratio. What it would do is the residential tax burden, so the overall taxes that we rely on from residential properties to pay, it would decrease because the tax rate, so the second part of this mathematical equation is multiplying tax rates. And so the residential tax rate would decrease, hence the reference in the proposed motion in terms of redistribution, including residential.
Councillor, can you wrap it up?
I'm trying. Thank you very much for this. I just wanted to suggest as part of the comeback from staff that we definitely look at that 2.63 number, but that we also talk about other things. So thank you so much. That's it. I understand. And thank you for the explanation. I think it's important.
Thank you. Councillor Maureen Wilson, please. That was very helpful, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether my questions are in order, because every year, every tax year, Mr. Zagarek and I have this conversation, and every year he helps me understand a little bit better. My questions are further to the multi-residential tax rate and whether Mr. Zagarek has knowledge or could speak to, and if not now, then maybe at a future, I'll look for your guidance, Chair, on the role of tax rates in affecting supply of a particular type. And because if I'm reading this correctly, and I may not be, a ratio of 2.4407, is that the same of saying that a multi-residential building is taxed at 244% greater than a single family dwelling? Through the chair.
J.M. Zagarek.
Through the chair, it does represent a weighting relative to residential. Again, property tax burden is determined by 2 factors. Is not only the tax rate, which is impacted by the tax ratio, but assessment. And multi-residential properties are not assessed in the same manner as residential properties. So for instance, a owner of a multi-residential property, they receive consideration for vacancies. They receive consideration for bad renters in the sense of unrealized rents. So again, the challenge of comparing the tax rates for multi-residential relative to residential, one also has to factor in the fact that both properties are assessed in a different manner. Hence, in the past, I think the last time we examined this was 2018, we took 2 like properties, a condominium and a multi-residential, similar characteristics, floor plan sizes, number of bedrooms, number of the amenities, and we looked at the overall tax burden, recognizing that their taxes are calculated in different manners. And so the approach was looking at overall tax burden against similar properties. I'm not sure, through the chair, I probably have not helped Councillor Wilson understand this. But again, this report comes back typically in April, May. Happy to have a conversation and hopefully not confuse matters even more so.
Councillor?
Thank you. I recall that April, May reporting, regular report on this, and it remains something of great fascination to me, and the rationale between I think the 1.98 rate of new multi-residential versus this for existing, and our commitment to trying to build a diversified housing stock. So I'll look forward to that report and try and make a greater sense of my questions at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Our next councillor is Councillor Taddison, please.
Through the chair to GM Zagaric, could you just expand on what it means by the landfill line up there for us?
General Manager Zagaric, please.
Yeah. So through the chair, this would relate to any landfills within the city, public or private landfills. And as it relates to, so this is a weighting. So if you looked at landfill, they're weighted at 1.8 times what a residential property. So typically residential is your base, your starting point at a weight of 1. And most other classes are higher relative to residential, with one exception, and that is farmland is lowered about, I believe we're about 0.18 or less than a quarter, and this is specific to the land related to farming, not the house on the farm, not the facilities on the farm, but the actual land used for farming.
Councillor?
I just want to ensure that this isn't, the intent isn't to burden farmers with an increase, correct?
GM Zagaric?
Through the chair, just as it relates to the motion that is before you, the direction is to investigate the opportunity to increase the pipeline tax ratio. So again, if staff report back with an option to increase the pipeline tax ratio, the impact that would have is to decrease the tax burdens for other property classes.
Okay, I'm starting to get it now. But I'm looking at that landfill line and it's increasing towards the provincial threshold. So the landfill, and again, I'm just trying to understand, does that mean that the city who owns the landfill site in Glanbrook is going to be taxed more? Like, I'm just trying to put that into my understanding level. Thank you.
GM Zagaric?
Through the chair, I thought adding that table was going to help the discussion. No, so a variety of reasons. Principally is municipal assets, we deem them municipal capital facilities. So we avoid paying property taxes and education taxes. So it would not impact the city landfill because we apply that policy. And as it relates to the provincial threshold, we are careful not to exceed those provincial thresholds because, again, it puts us in this situation where we're restricted on passing on tax increases.
Councillor?
Through the chair, thank you, GM.
Any further questions? Second time speaker is Councillor Nan, please.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, again, thank you to my colleagues for the questions for clarity around the table. The therefore be it resolved is succinct, and I thank General Manager Zagaric for making it succinct in that the goal here really is to increase the pipeline class tax rate and then decrease the burden on other property tax classes, including residential. And again, want to thank Delegate Adiola, as well as all the students who reached out last year during the budget cycle to start discussing these issues and look at ways in which we might, as a municipality, do things differently to help address the inequity of the current climate crisis that we're facing and start rectifying it through and within the budget process. And over the course of that year, there has been incredible deliberation and discussion, and I've benefited learning so much from the students who participated in this process to date. And it's been just absolutely, I just want to say thank you. Tons of gratitude to each one of you. And also I want to recognize my staff, Carrie Leclerc, who is our Community Climate Action Coordinator, who met with the team on a regular basis just to talk through strategy, as well as start unpacking some of the things that were being learned and putting it within the municipal framework to bring forward something very tangible today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor, for all your efforts. Much appreciated. Councillor Alex Wilson.
Just echoing on in support of the motion and in support of what Councillor Nan just said, I think what we've seen is that young people have been working for months in our city on this proposal, have brought forward something that was evidence-based, ready to go, and we were all better for it. This is Public Delegation Day, and I think this is the real spirit of what we're here for, and I think we've seen that from a lot of delegates. Concrete proposals to do better in our community, and so whether it's through a climate action committee, whether it's through some of the endeavors we're taking on, I hope we can all look back and remember this moment, because when young people get engaged in politics, when young people get engaged in our city, we are all better for it, and just such deep gratitude to Adiola and everyone else in this working group who has, evenings, weekends for so many months doing this work behind closed scenes to get to this point. We're all better for it, and just really want to express that gratitude and hope that we can hold on to this moment and remember how we're better for this engagement and how we can make sure that we have future engagement like this as we move ahead as well. Thank you.
Well said, Councillor. Any further comments or questions on the motion? The motion has been properly put, moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Alex Wilson, and we will vote on it now, please. Councillor Jackson's a thumbs up. And that passes 15-0. And the other thing that I wanted to ask our city manager, if I may, Vice Chair Danko, you should take the chair. Can you speak with your staff, not putting a motion forward, but trying to understand how the city would get a handle on the number of natural gas wells that are not capped and not decommissioned? And then if we can have a conversation offline and then perhaps come back with some direction to staff in terms of how we would move forward. Personally, I'm a little bit concerned, given that everything that I'm reading is that methane is far worse than carbon dioxide to the atmosphere in terms of greenhouse effect. And I don't know how many of these wells are leaking, and that's something that maybe as a municipality we should know. So just as a side note. Thank you, Vice Chair. I'll take the chair back. I do want to thank all of the delegates who appeared today, whether in person or virtually, and I do want to thank the delegates who did put their names forward, but for whatever reason, their schedule could not realign today. We sincerely appreciate everyone's participation. And as always, I do thank the councillors around this table and our staff. This has been a fulsome day. I now need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Spatafor, seconded by Councillor Wang. Thank you. Councillor Jackson's a thumbs up. And that vote carried 15-0. We are adjourned. Thank you.